If you've ever been in one of those really high-stakes planning meetings, you know the feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you're designing a building or managing a supply chain, and you walk out of the room with, like, a mountain of notes, a dozen email threads, and this just sinking feeling.
The feeling of, what do we actually decide?
Exactly. What did we agree to?
It's the Achilles heel of so much business communication. We talk and talk, but we don't formalize.
Right.
And in some fields, like large-scale construction, millions of dollars can hinge on a single choice. That mess of transcripts and chat logs, it's not just inefficient, it's a huge liability risk.
Well, that terrifying problem is exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at a system called the Transcript Directive Engine, or
TDE, yeah. And it's an AI-driven clarity pipeline. The whole point is to take all that chaos, all that unstructured human conversation,
and turn it into something concrete.
something organized, an indisputable list of decisions and tasks. They call it the Master Directives Table.
Okay, and this is where we have to be really, really specific. Because when you hear AI, you immediately think of, the chatbots we all use.
Right. And TDE is fundamentally not that. This is not a helpful assistant or a generic summarizer.
So what is it?
I think the best way to think about it is this. If a large language model is this incredibly powerful, maybe slightly wild engine,
Okay.
then the TDE architecture is the heavy-duty, highly regulated safety cage you build around it. It's got a rigid checklist, like you'd find in aviation or nuclear power.
So it's critical infrastructure, not just a general-purpose tool.
Precisely. And so our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the core doctrines, the philosophical rules, really, that enforce clarity and auditability at every single step.
We're going to see how an AI can actually be reliable and trustworthy, even when you feed it the messiest parts of human collaboration.
So the entire TDE project, it starts from a place that's deeply pessimistic about human input.
Pessimistic. That's an interesting starting point.
It is. It just assumes the conversation is going to be messy. It'll be vague, maybe even intentionally hedged. And that pessimism, it guides the entire philosophy.
How so?
It forces it to prioritize integrity and safety over, say, flexibility or just being easy for the user.
That feels like the complete opposite of how most AI is engineered. Usually the goal is to be as helpful as possible, right?
Right. But TDE puts strict limits on itself.
Yeah.
And it starts with what they call the non-entity doctrine.
Okay, the non-entity doctrine. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's the core rule. It strips the AI of any pretense of being a person. It has no agency.
So no, I think or I suggest.
Absolutely not. It's forbidden from using I or we. It never assumes what someone intended, and critically, it never ever invents facts. They even enforce this in the system prompt.
The actual instructions.
Yeah, the instruction is literally something like, you are a clarity engine. You are not a person or chatbot. It's a formalized, very well-paid clerk. It's not a collaborator.
I love that framing. A clerk, not a collaborator. And I assume that focus drives its whole structure, the directive-first architecture.
Exactly. The goal is never to just summarize the meeting. The goal is to answer one question. What clear, actionable directive resulted from this interaction?
And if it can't find one?
Well, if the system tries to extract a task, but it can't point that task directly back to a specific sentence in the original transcript, it doesn't just forget about it. It treats that as security violation.
Wow.
It's evidence-only processing. No evidence, no directive.
Which brings us to this mantra that I saw, which feels like it should be on a poster everywhere in their office. Hold guess.
That's the simplest but most important rule of all. If the system encounters any ambiguity, it is forbidden from trying to resolve it with a probabilistic guess.
So it can't just take its best shot.
No. It has to halt the process. Or it immediately escalates that item for a human to review. That's the whole path. Any flicker of uncertainty, any missing piece of data, boom. It triggers a hold.
Okay, but hang on. If the system is designed to just constantly flag things as holda every time a conversation gets a little messy, which is, always, aren't you just creating a massive administrative bottleneck for humans to solve? Doesn't that defeat the purpose?
That's the critical trade-off.
Yeah.
And TDE's architects, they lean right into it through something they call the priority doctrine. They completely flip the loyalty stack. Most AIs. They put you, the user, first. TDE puts you last. Last. Primary loyalty is always mission trajectory and safety, the core compliance rules. Secondary loyalty is system clarity. It has to refuse any action that would compromise its own deterministic operation.
And only then, if those two are met.
Only then. At tertiary loyalty, does it consider host or client utility?
So if being helpful conflicts with being safe and auditable, it uses safety every single time.
It's a fail-closed mechanism.
Right.
It guarantees that bad, ambiguous information can never sneak its way into that final master directives table.
Okay, so that doctrine is the protective bubble. Now let's trace an actual transcript through this thing. You described TDE not as a black box, but more like an assembly line.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a series of modules, all governed by this deterministic scaffolding.
And the first module is ingestion and normalization. This is where all the raw chaos from the meeting gets fed in.
Exactly. The first job is to impose fidelity, but without changing anything.
What do you mean?
So, if the audio transcription is unclear in a spot, TDE doesn't guess the word, it just flags it as known.
Ah.
Grammatical errors, slang, interruptions, it all stays. The AI proves it's a non-entity by refusing to clean up the messy reality of how people actually talk.
And this is also where the whole accountability backbone gets built, right? The chain of custody.
This is it. Every single line of that input transcript is immediately given a unique lineage and a cryptographic hash.
Okay, so that's for forensic traceability?
Absolutely. From this point on, every single piece of data that gets extracted has to be able to trace its existence back to that original hashed source text. This is what makes the output stand up in court.
I see.
Of course, this is where it does rigorous redaction. Any sensitive personal info gets replaced with a placeholder, like redacted.type, and it keeps a separate ledger of what was removed without ever storing the sensitive data itself.
So once you have that clean, normalized, and hashed transcript, it moves to stage 2.
Which you call the intelligent traffic controller.
That's its job, segmentation and routing. It breaks the transcript down into chunks and computes 2 key metrics for each chunk. Directive likelihood.
How likely is this a task?
Yep, and ambiguity score.
How clear is the language?
Exactly, and based on very rigid, predefined thresholds, say likelihood is over 0.7, it routes that segment down one of 3 paths.
And those 3 paths are clear, echo, and hold.
Right. Clear is for the easy stuff, high confidence, low ambiguity. Those go straight for extraction.
Echo is where things get interesting. Mixed signals, conditional language, maybe this system detects a metaphor or an idiom. Those get sent to a specialized ambiguity handler.
And hold D is the emergency exit.
It's the ultimate failsafe. If critical info is just missing, there's no action, there's no owner, or the ambiguity score is just through the roof, the module just sends it directly to a human. It skips all the other automation.
You gave me an example.
Okay, simple one. A manager says, could be better over there.
Right. Vague.
Totally vague. What's the action? Who's the owner? Over there means nothing. That segment hits the high ambiguity threshold and is immediately routed to hold. Garbage never even gets a chance to become output.
All right, let's follow that clear path first, the easy stuff. These high-confidence segments go to the structured directive extraction module.
Yep, and this is where they're turned into a row for that master directives table.
The who, what, when, and status.
Exactly. But, and this is critical, that non-entity rule still applies right here in the data fields. So if the owner of a task or the due date isn't explicitly mentioned in the source text,
it doesn't guess.
It doesn't guess. It sets the field to null or in.
Which forces someone to follow up. It refuses to create a false sense of certainty.
You got it. And we saw a great example of this. There was a construction directive about a storage closet. It seemed clear, but the system still flagged it as DAFT and gave it a lower confidence score, a stability score of 0.75.
Why?
Because the original transcript included a little note, pending final layout check.
So it's constantly second-guessing its own data.
Constantly. Now, let's look at the echo path, because that's where the really interesting stuff happens. These segments go to the ambiguity parser, which uses what they call the multiverse approach.
The multiverse. Okay, that sounds fun.
It is, in a sort of legal and engineering sense. When it's faced with a vague statement, the parser doesn't try to pick the single correct meaning.
What does it do instead?
It generates a small set, maybe 2 or 3, of plausible interpretations. And it explicitly states the assumptions that would have to be true for each one. It just lays it out. It could mean X or it could mean Y.
And it presents those options to the human.
Exactly. Like in that design meeting sample, a client was debating between plaster and stone vent hood. They didn't actually decide.
So the system created 2 possible futures.
Right. It provided interpretation A, plaster, with 84% confidence, interpretation B, stone, with 69% confidence. And then it immediately marked the whole item as draft plus whole ULP. It wasn't generating an answer, it was framing the necessary question.
And there's another module that helps with this, right? By figuring out why the input was messy.
Yeah, that module identifies drift archetypes, basically patterns of vagueness. So if someone says, let's just do it like we did on the old cabin project.
That's useless without context.
Totally. TDE flags that pattern as a nostalgia echo. Or it might flag an idiom or a conditional hedge. And that diagnosis is key because it links that specific type of vagueness to a predefined clarification template.
So it asks a better question.
It asks a precise, actionable question, not just what do you mean, but which specific features from the old cabin, the siding, the roof pitch, or the window style should we incorporate?
Okay, so after all that, extraction or parsing, every item has to face one last checkpoint, the suppression and final compliance gate. This is the systems lawyer.
It's the ultimate gatekeeper. It runs a bunch of checks. It checks for tone.
Yeah.
So
for every single one of those items that got flagged holdy by the traffic controller, the ambiguity parser, or that final gate, it gets kicked over to the clarification and escalation workflow.
Right. This is the human-in-the-loop stage, but it's very rigidly structured.
It's not just a free-for-all.
Not at all. The human is engaged through what they call a clarification ladder. We already mentioned those targeted queries.
Right, the super specific questions.
But if those don't work, it escalates. It might move to a binary choice. Here's interpretation A, here's interpretation B, pick one. Or, if it's really confident, it might propose an AI-generated rewrite that still requires an explicit human sign-off.
It sounds like they've really thought about how to prevent the human from just clicking, yeah, sure, looks good.
They have. And if, after all of that, the human input is still vague or fails to resolve the ambiguity, the system triggers a parser lock.
A parser lock.
The item is frozen indefinitely. It simply refuses to proceed. And right there, it proves its loyalty doctrine. It will sacrifice immediate utility to maintain data integrity.
Of course, all of this discipline is useless if you can't prove it happened. And that proof is in the final stage, evidence and audit trails.
This is the core of its value. It's all about liability protection and trustworthiness.
Forensic traceability.
It's the key deliverable. Every single step, every decision. The transcript segment, the interpretation, the final directive. It's all registered in a tamper-evident evidence ledger.
Yeah.
Which rule fired, what threshold was applied, why did it route to hold, it's all recorded.
So if there's a legal dispute 6 months from now, an auditor can literally reconstruct the entire decision-making process.
They can pull up the audit trail and see exactly why a directive was created, modified, or held, and trace it right back to the specific line of text and the specific logic rule that processed it.
Wow.
And what's more, when an ambiguous item is finally resolved by a human, that entire back and forth, the questions the system asked, the answers the person gave, is recorded in a memory capsule.
So nothing is resolved off the record.
Nothing. It creates a bulletproof defense against any he said, she said arguments. It transforms those messy verbal exchanges into defensible records.
When you look at its use case in construction capturing client design choices or turning some vague comment on a site inspection into a formal task, the real benefit here is risk mitigation.
Absolutely. The system is basically an insurance policy.
And it feels like this TDE model, which prioritizes determinism and compliance over just being chatty. It feels like a blueprint.
It is a blueprint for any high liability domain. Legal contract drafting, healthcare handoffs, complex manufacturing. It establishes that for critical infrastructure, AI needs accountability first and helpfulness second.
You know, the total value proposition here is fascinating because its success isn't just about making the AI smarter. It's about forcing the human users to be clearer.
That's a huge part of it. It improves the quality of communication.
It makes project management proactive and bulletproof by creating this verifiable record of every single decision.
The TDE really proves that for any mission-critical use, in the enterprise, that raw intelligence has to be harnessed. It has to be put inside a disciplined, auditable framework.
It's the difference between an AI that wants to be helpful
and an AI that's engineered from the ground up to be responsible.
Which leaves us with a final and, I think, pretty provocative thought for you to consider. If a future AI system that you rely on can't explicitly and systematically document why it chose one interpretation over another, and if it isn't willing to log a HLD rather than just output a guess, how trustworthy can it really be? Especially when precision means profit or quite literally safety.